Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of my live streaming series. It's actually really hard for me to start OBS and just start talking, but I think now that I'm here, I'll stay here and just go through this presentation I made for you. So, I studied composition. That was one of my majors in school. And before I speak about my experience, I would like to try and give you a picture about what a typical composition major would look like in my view. So, firstly, I think composition majors really like orchestral instruments, and they probably grew up in a culture where these instruments were readily available, or maybe these composition majors played these instruments at some point and they have a knowledge of these instruments. And if I think of just about anyone, I think people tend to have certain natural preferences when it comes to the sounds that they hear. Some people really like electronic music, like me. Some people really like distorted guitars, like me. And some people really like orchestral instruments, like composition majors. And I think they view the orchestra and orchestral instruments as the primary sound generators of their music. And actually, I never really thought about this too hard, despite being involved in multiple different ways of creating music. But the way you create your music and the tools through which you really create your music have a profound impact on the actual output of your music. And I never really thought about this. But anyways, composition majors probably only think of orchestral music, orchestral instruments as their sound generators, and therefore they probably have a lot of knowledge about orchestration, and they've probably been to a lot of live concerts of this music, which gets those sounds in their ears and their brain and all of that. Additionally, I think they are either already musically literate or they are aspiring to literacy. And so that means they can usually read and write music pretty well, or want to write and read music pretty well at some point. I think classical music is probably one of the few musical cultures in which literacy is deeply valued. There's all other kinds of music where literacy isn't really valued too much, or maybe even in some cases it's frowned upon. But I think there's no going around this when it comes to classical music. Needless to say, I think composition majors have heard a lot of classical music and they probably listen to classical music for fun. And classical music is very broad. You could listen to stuff from the 1600s, from the 1800s, or maybe even stuff from today, because there is contemporary classical music out there. But I think the foundation of most composition majors' listening experience is probably stuff from the common practice period. If you don't know what that is, maybe you've heard names like Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. All these composers fall under that category of common practice music. And so I think a lot of these composition majors probably go into composition knowing a lot of this music. And so when I think of these four factors that I've given you, I don't really know if this really applied to me as I was heading into composition, because firstly I wasn't I wasn't particularly literate. I still laugh when I look at the score on the left. I wrote that when I was 18, and it probably took me a month to figure out because I was a very slow reader. I hated reading music. Needless to say, writing music was a completely novel experience at that point because I hadn't spent any time doing it. And I still remember, even if I got sheet music to play in some kind of a band or some kind of an orchestra, even if it was whole notes, I would have to write out each and every note because I just wasn't literate, you know. I preferred thinking of music on my keyboard or my piano, I guess, and I really liked visualizing music that way. I just couldn't read music, it wasn't my thing. And actually, I used to make music using music software quite a bit. So the thing you see on the right, the software looking stuff, that was more comfortable to me than some of the other things you find in classical music, like staff notation and even just certain theoretical things. I just I just wasn't interested in literacy at that point, and I wasn't good at it. In terms of the music I heard growing up, well, I mostly didn't go listen to live music because I stayed in my room for the most part and heard music on the internet. And I was unaware of the musical scene in my city or cities. And I have no clue if there was any classical music out there in places like New Delhi or Bangalore. There probably was, but I guess I wasn't looking for it. I think the only concert I went to during my teens was a Hardwell concert. If you don't know who Hardwell is, he's a Dutch DJ. And it's actually pretty funny to think about in retrospect because I was 13 when I went. I don't know how I got in. I'm guessing it was legal. Oops. In terms of the music I was listening to, I mean, just look at the list here. You would have thought I was a guitarist or something like that, because these names suggest that: Pink Floyd, Dream Theater, Pantera, Avenged Sevenfold, and then in the 2018 list, Animals as Leaders. All of this is really guitar heavy music, and it's either rock or metal or some kind of subgenre of those larger genres, I guess. I think you do see one concerto in F major in my 2018 list. That is a classical piece, but I think I was probably listening to it because I took music as a subject when I was in school. And so, you know, I have to get my A's and stuff like that. That's why I must have been listening to it, really. In 2019, I think things really changed because I started listening to classical music unironically. And you see one particular artist in this list dominate the list. Oops, grammar. Glenn Gould. He was a Canadian pianist, and I still remember the first time I came across his music. I was sitting in my school's library with my friend Rohan Guha Ramabhadran, and we would have been playing football, but that particular day I think we decided to go to the library. And so we did what everyone who goes to the library does. We pulled out our iPads and started watching YouTube videos, and I stumbled across this one. So the person you see on in the top row, I guess, that's Glenn Gould. He's the pianist, and the guy in the suit below is Leonard Bernstein. Bernstein. I always forget. But this video is really cool. I would highly recommend you to watch it if you haven't seen it. And I think I really liked it because of its educational value. Leonard Bernstein goes on to explain some of the intellectual problems that exist in classical music, such as the problem of trying to interpret music that was written 300 years ago. So, how do you write music and expect performers to understand it hundreds of years later? You know, what kinds of instructions do you have to provide for these performers, and how can you ensure that the performance will reflect the true intentions of the composer? I thought all of these things were super intellectually engaging, and this video really helped me appreciate the music I was listening to. Because up until that point, sure, I had heard some classical music and I maybe knew what was going on. But if someone presented classical music to me in this format or in this manner, where I was asked to appreciate it and think a little harder about some of the things that were happening within the music, then that made it really way more exciting and engaging. And yeah, Glenn Gould is an amazing pianist. I am kind of embarrassed to say that I never really tried listening to any other classical pianists after I heard Glenn Gould. Probably not a good thing, but it is what it is. And I knew what the term counterpoint meant before I heard Glenn Gould, but I think his performance really made me understand what it was truly. And I think this was my entry into classical music, you know. My background wasn't classical. Um, it was, well, I don't know what it was, but it was certainly non classical. But this was probably the only thing that got me into it, Glenn Gould, and listening to Leonard Bernstein talk about some of those problems. And all of a sudden, I had this intellectual thirst to discover more. So eventually, I went to music school, and I had to declare my major and stuff like that. And I knew for sure that I wanted to write my own music. And so I browsed through the list of majors they had at my college, and I ended up picking composition. I guess I was really sold when the composition department said, "We want you to build your own individual voice." And I was like, "Yes, all right, I'll do that." Um, and I actually didn't know what I was getting into because there were a lot of other things that the major makes you do, like make scores and orchestrate music. I just wasn't aware of these things, but I knew I wanted to make my own music. And so in April 2020, I was formally a composition major. And in the beginning few semesters of my composition journey, I actually had a lot of fun because I was writing music from scratch, and it was super detailed, as classical music tends to be, and it was very engaging. I really loved it. The stuff you see on the left is some handwritten stuff. The stuff you see on the right is some analysis that I had to do. And again, that goes hand in hand with being able to appreciate the music you're listening to. And I think that was a really big part of why I did composition. I think I just wanted to appreciate it. A lot of these other types of music I just sort of understood, but classical music seemed mysterious. So I really enjoyed analysis and listening to the music I had just analyzed, because that really makes you perceive the music in a different way, and it's much more satisfying, really. But I often wondered if I was a misfit in the major, because although I just said I took composition in order to appreciate the music, I did wonder whether I was in the right major, because I could never really appreciate classical music at its face value. So the picture on screen is Jordan Hall. I've been there many times by this point, and I heard a lot of classical music, but I rarely enjoyed rarely enjoyed it. And I realized that I could only appreciate this music after I went through some kind of an educational process, be it analysis or maybe knowing something about the history, so on and so forth. With all the other music I had heard, such as the metal stuff and the rock stuff I showed you, I didn't need context. It just appealed to me in a very raw and natural way. And so I wondered, should I really be in the composition major if I don't even like the music all that much? If I think of the things I was listening to, I mean, during my college years, right, this is mostly jazz. And the closest connection that Bill Evans has to, let's say, classical music is that he was classically trained, and there were some classical composers that inspired him, such as Claude Debussy and Maurice Ravel. But really, I think it's obvious that classical music at this point hadn't really made its impact on me in terms of just appreciating the listening elements. Socially, too, I felt kind of awkward in many ways, because I would hear my peers talk about classical music in a way which I couldn't. And I just didn't really get some of the inner inner jokes, I want to say, not the jokes, but I just didn't get the culture surrounding it. So what you see on screen is four potential strategies that people who go into new cultures adopt. So the first one is segregation, where the person coming in into a new culture stays sticks to their old ways and doesn't really try to adopt any of the new beliefs or values that they find in their new culture. Integration is when the person might keep or retain some of their old beliefs and preferences, but they also adopt some of the new ones. Assimilation is where they completely adopt the new culture's beliefs and values without retaining too much of their old culture stuff. And the fourth one, which is I think where I belong, is marginalization, which is where you neither retain the old values of your culture nor adopt the new values of the new culture that you're in. And I say that because I feel like I had left behind the rock and metal stuff I was listening to, and I came into this classical world, but I wasn't too impressed, and I couldn't fake my interest in it. You know, I was happy as far as analysis and theory was concerned, but when it came to actually appreciating the music, it just wasn't for me. So I felt kind of awkward because I didn't know who I could relate to, you know? Oh, enter contemporary music. So, this course really changed a lot of things for me. I took this course in the fall of 22, and it's a course about contemporary music. There is such a course called Contemporary Techniques 1. It was also good, but this course focuses on even newer music. So music from, let's say, the 1920s, the 1950s, the 1980s, the 2000s, the 2010s, all of that. And up until I had taken the course, I was mostly listening to music from, centuries ago, like the 1700s and the 1800s. And, some of it was cool. But this course really changed a lot of things for me, because what I took from the course was you can do what you want and you can come up with your own way to make music. And there is no right method of doing things. And I thought that was really liberating. Now I will confess that a lot of the music I heard, a lot of the contemporary music I heard wasn't very engaging or interesting. It was kind of boring sometimes, but I really enjoyed the prospect of having some kind of technical and aesthetic freedom, and I was really, really looking forward to developing that. So I heard some music, and again, the music was hit or miss, but I really enjoyed the idea that someone out there heard all the classical music that existed out there and then said, you know what, I want to make something that's my own, and I want to make something that's new. And in many cases, I feel like I heard music that was indistinguishably that person's music. So I feel like some of Sariaho's music really falls into that category. Some of Stravinsky's music might fall into that category. Some of Toru Takemitsu's music might fall into that category. It's just music that sounds exactly like them. And I think I was really interested in the idea of being my own individual self and trying to convey that through my music. And so I kept digging into it. Here's an example. It's kind of, scholarly, but it was probably one of my first attempts to seek my own unique voice and all that. And I thought it was super fun. It was very intellectually engaging, which is cool. And the music sounded weird, but, I think at that point it was a pretty healthy experiment. And I think school, as I'm sure a lot of people would agree, is a nice place to experiment with things, because you might not get a chance to do it later, right? By the end of my degree, I was actually kind of happy with the music I wrote. On the left, you see a piano piece that was pretty theoretical. It's it was composed using two pitch class sets. If you don't know what that means, it's a whole new story. But it's a very strict theoretical kind of piece. But I like the way it sounds. The stuff on the right is a string quartet, and I wrote it by hand. I didn't use the piano. Needless to say, I didn't use any kind of playback, and I just wrote it. And I was pretty happy with that too. And both of these pieces got performed, and I was happy with the performances. The performers told me they liked my music. I guess they would have to say that because they're playing it. But I really loved what I was doing. Really, I also heard some extremely contemporary music. So this is from the year 2023, and this piece, Among Arrows, was written by Heather Stebbins. I think that's how you say her name. And it didn't sound anything like I had heard before. Certainly nothing like what I had heard before my introduction to contemporary music. Yeah, really recommend that piece. Oh, Eric Whitaker. So, I mentioned how I felt like my background didn't really set me up for a classical music degree of sorts. Well, here's Eric Whitaker. I I don't like his music, but I heard one of his. I listened to one of his interviews, and in it he says, "You know what? I wasn't a classical musician. I mostly wrote pop songs, and I played rock or like pop or something like that, and then I did a composition degree." And that makes me feel like there's someone out there who's in the same boat as me. And I'm sure Eric Whitaker isn't the only example. I'm sure there are many, many more people who are just like him, just like us, I guess. Yeah, I don't know about his music, but he's a really well-spoken person, and I thought I felt I felt like I could relate to him, which is interesting. So, anyways, I kind of got over the social marginalization thing, which is cool. And in retrospect, if I think of all the other majors I could have done writing wise, I could have done contemporary writing and production, which is commercial music for commercial things. And I guess you can't really develop too much of an individual style in that format. Probably not. Game and interactive media scoring. I could have done that, but that's fine. Film and media scoring. Well, I don't really watch movies, and I guess I never really paid attention to film music, so that wasn't going to happen. And I think it's pretty true that with film music, at least while you're at college, you aren't asked to develop some kind of an individual voice. You sort of have to fit different different genres, and you have to create model representations of music that already exists out there. I think that's what it seems like. Jazz composition, could have done that probably, but yeah, I just never considered it because in 2020, when I picked my major, I hadn't really heard too much jazz, so that wasn't going to happen. But composition now feels like the best choice I could have made because I think I am a person who wants to make my own music, and it has to be mine, and I don't want to listen to anyone else's rules too much, and I just need my freedom. I think that's just my personality. There was one thing that I never quite resolved with my composition degree, which was using sound sources that I actually liked. So I mentioned how composition majors usually use the orchestra as the primary generators of their music. Well, I did that, but I still didn't enjoy it. But I eventually satisfied all of those needs I had through my other major, electronic production and design. And so my next episode will be about my love for electronic music. So thanks for watching. And as promised, here's a fun activity. So I think I need to. So I'm switching between triplets and quintuplets. Let's to ta pa ta ta. Okay, triplets. One, two, three, two, two, three, three, two, three, four, two, three, one, two, three, two, two, three, three, two, three, four, two, three, one, two, three, four, five, one, two, three, four, five, one, two, three. Fun. By the way, the metronome was one and three. I need to drink some water. Okay, thanks for. OMG, so much fun. Listen, okay. Yo, shout out to my friend Debbie who's watching my live stream. Amazing. Thanks, homie. And oh yeah, congrats to my friend Debbie because he got published recently. He studies medicine and now he's a published author, and that's amazing. And now he's okay, so the stream is lagging behind, but he'll hear this. And yeah, stay tuned for my